Roger that, Victor. See you on the other side.
So, my name is Philippe, and I will bring you a story today that is actually really very close to my heart. I believe that when you look back at your career, you have achieved a lot. And when you think about the reasons why you achieved a lot, you will inevitably bump into good leaders. Good leadership can be transformational, both for you and the people that you lead. Bad leadership also. And so, allow me to introduce that with a quick story. This used to be my boat, and I loved sailing. I was absolutely into sailing. I would spend all my weekends, all my holidays at sea. And Norda was in Gdynia, I was living in Warsaw, and I would travel every weekend back and forth. But then, of course, after having this beautiful daughter, I had a human family. And the human family also needed some attention. And so when my first child was born, for half a year, I hadn't been sailing. And then I had those crazy bunch of people that wanted to rent Norda in November. Those people had never set a foot on a boat at the sea. Some people had been sailing on lakes, but never at the sea. Experience is, of course, very different. I did have a first officer, a person that was very experienced, served on Polish submarines during the Cold War. And so we were two handling that boat and taking a totally unexperienced crew in the winter. It was actually starting to look like a lovely adventure, but it's hardly to be called an adventure. You see, I was sitting on front of the boat, keeping watch. There are no waves, there are no boats. It's a beautiful winter day at sea. I had a small problem. Actually, I maybe shouldn't have been there. In that sense, I had a lung infection and was still taking antibiotics. Now, in the winter, it can be cold and wet on the Baltic Sea, and so maybe that's not the best environment. But you see how nice and quiet it was. And so we were sailing out, and we were going to Bornholm, and the next morning we woke up to this. It is actually only 7 before. So it is actually the hardest wind that you normally can get on land. But at sea, it is pretty normal. So for myself and my first officer, nothing special. And I took care of myself. I went down and slept and tried to get better. Of course, people got afraid. I miscalculated how impressive it was to be surrounded by nothing than water. Something goes wrong, you can call for help, but nobody will come, or it will take them a day to find you. You can't get off the boat, the water is ice cold. You will undercool within 15 minutes and you can't move anymore and you will die a slow death in the water. Because that boat, well, we will of course try to turn it around. That might take 20 minutes to turn it around. And then we will come back and try to find you, but you will be like 10 centimeters above the water. So it must have made a horrible impression to many people. When we arrived in Klaipeda, because we changed our course, some people, they just left the boat, running off and trying to get back to Poland via a bus. They have never set a foot on a boat again. The boat was in total disarray, nothing was organized, it was a big mess, and the weather was only getting worse. By then it was blowing, storm force, and well, we had to find a solution. And the solution came in the weather forecast. That was still the time before the mobile phones. And so we had a cunning plan to basically sail south the next morning. That would give us a window of around 20 hours of fair weather, wind in decent condition, in decent direction. And so we did. After this beautiful sunset, that doesn't spell much good, but that's how it looked like. Now it looks reasonably impressive. You see that mountain of water, of tens of tons of water chasing the boat, but the boat will float on it. We had the wind from behind, you see the flag moving forward. Actually, okay, you will get sick, but it's comfortable. You don't get too much water on board, and you actually go pretty fast. So it was going very fine. But unfortunately, the weather forecast wasn't very precise. That happens, especially in the Baltic, especially in the winter. And 12 hours before the hard weather was supposed to come in, we got really storm weather. And unfortunately, for us, the direction of the wind was very unfortunate. We were fighting to basically stay in place. We had horrible situations, like we had sails blown out, we had almost people getting overboard, because actually with some situation of leadership in a way. Maybe worth to tell that story too. At some point, you just can't for a few days not sleep. So I have to go down, lay down for 10 minutes, have this kind of power nap. And I heard certain things that I wasn't expected to hear. I come up the deck and I see the first officer at the steering wheel, alone. Horrified look on his face. You can't talk to him because the wind blows literally the words away. And I turn around and look in the direction where he was looking, and they were inexperienced people on front of the boat. And the front moves, of course, very much. You know that boat had that bowsprit. Somebody was on that bowsprit trying to get a sail down. That person was, of course, secured somehow, but he had secured himself on the wrong cable. We have an inch-thick cable that keeps the bowsprit in place, and that's, of course, the one that you should use. And then we have a 2mm thick one that you can use to wrap the sail around in the harbor so it looks nice. Guess which one he was using. I thought I had a person that was irrecoverable, so tried to get to the front of the boat, which is pretty dangerous. You know, the wind by then was blowing around 8 bar 4, so you have gale force wind, which means like around 100 kilometers. So maybe what you should do to get an impression is drive 100 kilometers per hour on the car, stick out your hand for a full minute, and see how it feels. And then imagine that you have to stand in those conditions and hold on. And then imagine that there is no place to get off the boat. And then imagine that the car is moving like 45 degrees in each direction. That is more or less what it is. And of course, the icy rain and wind in your face. I was able to get the crew back to safety, or the back part of the boat. Then I went back for the last person that was still clinging on for dear life, and it all worked out. And then I told my first officer, okay, and now you sail 10 degrees more to the wind. The sail fell down by itself, and I went up front and secured the sail. No reason to send 4 people there, definitely not inexperienced people, but you see, something went wrong. Something blocked in him. He was an experienced person, had been in very dangerous situations. He had been serving on submarines. And you know, those things are, by definition, in a very dangerous situation. But he was used to get orders. So what was happened is actually he got afraid of the situation. And despite we agreed to sail with a small sail, he had asked to put on a bigger sail. And of course, it was blown out. It didn't work. Anyhow, I also realized we weren't making any progress. We needed a kind of emergency plan. So the only option was to turn around. That's the last picture that we have. Well, was still the time before mobile phones. Kind of regret it, because it would have been spectacular. And so we tried to sail back to Klaipėda. Conditions were absolutely. So to paint you a picture, well, it is like being in a hard rock concert. You can't talk to each other. It is overwhelming. It is something that makes you feel really very small and vulnerable. Those waves are way stronger than you. Those waves are stronger than your boat. And also myself and my first officer, we realized that that was way above what the boat could take. We weren't supposed to survive it. I typically took off my wedding ring on that boat because it's rough work, but I put it back on because that's how I wanted to die. I kind of knew we wouldn't survive it. It's very interesting because when you are in a dangerous situation, you probably had that when you were driving a car and suddenly almost an accident and you have that shock, and then it wanes. But on the boat, it doesn't go away, it only gets worse. You actually know that you're going to die, because that boat, well, it's a wooden boat. It was 80 years old. That's an old lady. You have to treat her with respect. Not in such conditions. And the wind got worse and worse. For example, the boat was making water. Water was coming in through the hull, which is normal. It's a wooden boat. You pump it out. And we have a system on the motor to pump it out. It has some kind of rubber system. It's called wiertnik in Polish. I don't know the English word. And so when it burns up, you put in a new one. And at a certain point, you don't have spare parts. We switched on the electric pumps. And they didn't react, full of water already. We had a manual pump, and for 6 hours people have been pumping that hard, and then the thing stopped working too. So we were slowly going under, we had sails blown out, we were being blown towards the Russian coast, so we had to switch on the motor to help us to push away from the wind. Of course, the boat was moving so fast that the dirt of the diesel tanks got into the filters, filter blocked. We have a spare filter, a very simple crane, and of course the spare filter gets stuck. And then after a while you have to open the filters while you're being pushed to the Russian coast. And of course, crashing on the coast is absolutely dangerous. You don't want to crash with the boat. That thing is 40 tons of hard wood and steel, and you're so fragile. You won't survive it. So horrible, horrible situation. And we were so lucky in a way to get 20 minutes before dark in Klaipėda harbor. Klaipėda was closed for traffic because it was too dangerous to get in. At that moment, the wind was blowing into the harbor, and so you have very high waves, and when you're surfing on those waves, you have little control over the boat, and you can get smashed to one of those concrete sides. Of course, the boat crashes, but the people on it too. It was the first and the only time that I had to have the whole crew on deck with life jackets on. When I was sailing into the harbor, but we made it. The thing is, the whole crew was there. Those people experienced everything. And when plan after plan after plan failed, they always knew when, let's say, what would be the next plan. They felt that somehow we kept them safe. And that really worked. The people that were then on board, they still sail. Some of them got passionate about sailing and have now their own captain's license, patent kapitanski or something. And when I come on board, they don't see me. Sorry. They don't see me as a person that almost got them killed. They still have a certain respect. They still invite me when they go sailing, and they see me somehow as a honorary captain still. For them, I'm still a leader in those things there. How is that possible? That were the same people that were on board the first part of the trip. And so many things went wrong. And from that first part, it was such a mess, and the situation wasn't even dangerous. Second part, we shouldn't have survived. It was unfair to survive it. And those people felt comfortable. They were calm, and when we arrived in Klaipėda, a few hours later, the boat was cleaned up. We had a plate broken. I still have my finger marked, and I will take that forever. I think the only difference is in the leadership style. In the first part, the captain was sick and taking care of himself to get better. In the second part of the trip, the captain was there to make sure that the people knew what was going on. People were informed about the plan. The captain was there to keep them safe and was even able to make them food from time to time. I wasn't able to eat, of course, because I was too sick. I had to get back out. But you see, that must be something. That must be something worth for us to think about. And if you think now, well, I haven't been in a life-threatening situation. So what can I bring to the table of being a good leader? Well, honestly, leadership isn't extraordinary at all. Leadership happens every day. It's actually a very dynamic situation. Leadership actually has very much in common with parents. And you see that father on the picture, saving the face of the kid, well, in the process probably breaking his arm, and you clearly see he is not happy with that situation. He is not doing that with enthusiasm, but he does it. And just as we're kind of all designed to be parents, maybe not everybody should be a parent though, very much the same for leadership. We're all designed to be a leader when we need it. Maybe some people shouldn't be a leader. Maybe, just like parenting, maybe it is nothing for you and you don't enjoy it. The difference is, with leadership you can try. Once you have a child, it's a little bit more hard to get rid of. By the way, we still have 4 places here if people want to sit down. Very welcome. So, leadership is maybe not that complex at all. Leadership is being that person who keeps the tribe safe. It's probably a very fundamental, very deep thing inside of who we are. We have spent millions of years living in very small tribes, in very dangerous environment. We had left the trees 10 million years ago, and we were living in small groups, trying to survive. And on the ground, we were probably the slowest and the worst armed animal around. An actual model where the leader is the one that keeps the group safe and put himself or herself at danger to keep the others safe works pretty well. And you will see being a leader, it will come with certain privileges. In primitive times, you would probably have had the first choice of meat and mate. Nowadays, people might hold the door open for you. On the other hand, the leader doesn't have to be the person that we typically think of as a leader, a person who is loud, who shouts, who tells us what to do, who is very late in the office, who sets the example of a high pace, who is thinking only about the KPIs. Actually, none of those things seem to be important. The key thing seems to be you have to genuinely care about people. That word genuinely is probably key because well, you can fake it to some extent, but actually people are kind of designed to filter out and feel that you're faking. Now that is very, very different from being a good manager. Manager is what I consider as the thing that is on your business card. You are Chief Technology Officer or CEO of a company. That comes on your business card, and from that day you are that leader in that sense, although for the purpose of this presentation I call it manager. In fact, being a manager is not that hard because you don't come to the office to boycott your boss, isn't it? That's not your hobby, that's not your purpose. You want to keep your job, you want to provide for your family, doing something meaningful, and part of that game is keeping your job. So if your boss tells you to do this, then you will do this. So manager basically has to do 3 things. First is you have to provide clarity. A second thing a manager has to do is provide clarity. And you guessed it by now, the third thing is obviously to provide clarity. And basically a manager has to be able to provide clarity about what has to be done, how it has to be done, when it has to be done. And when you do that, typically people will just do it. If you leave them alone a little, then it will all work out. So the problem now is that the image that I just painted of a manager who tells you what, how, and when, and a leader who protects you and probably, I should add, inspires you to do the work, is very, very different. So we have 2 categories that actually hardly overlap. And you might think it will be hard to move from the one to the other. Maybe you don't have to, and maybe there is something in between. You probably recognize this. This is from the book, The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team, from Patrick Lencioni. Very famous when it goes about teamwork. And his thinking was, if you want a team that focuses on results, so it has all attentions focused on the results, not on infighting, not grudges, not protecting yourself from mistakes that eventually might happen, well, then you need people that hold each other accountable and work together. To get that, you will need people that commit to what you set out to do. People will only be able to commit to something if they have been able to speak up. And we all know those meetings where your boss is present and your whole team, and somebody has an idea and the boss says, great idea, let's do it. And then everybody says, yeah, great idea, let's do it. And nobody dares go in against that consensus. Bad team. Because you should be able to stand up and say, well, I have another idea, or I don't think it's optimal, and your boss shouldn't see that as a negative conflict. People should be able to see that as constructive conflict. You do that with the genuine interest of the team in mind. Now, that will only work when people trust each other. So that model actually worked. For me, that book was transformational. That was when I started to understand why many things I tried didn't work out, and some things I accidentally did good did work out. And so, working through that pyramid, starting to work on trust, you see, that is the kind of difficult part. I cannot just say, oh, please trust me, I will do this or whatever. That doesn't work like that. But once you trust me, I can ask you to speak your mind, you will be able to commit, you will feel that it is okay to be held accountable for the thing that you committed to do, and you will be able to focus on the results. So once you have the trust in place, the rest becomes mechanical. And now you have a team that you can use as a manager to do the things that you were set out to do. And you have a mechanism where the whole team can work together. And the only thing that you have to do is to add that layer of trust. So now we have 3 models. What is in it for you? Or what should you try to do? Well, actually, if you want to be performant, you have to do all 3 of them. And so here is my theory. The best place to start is with yourself. That's the only thing that you control. And then trying to work to the outwards world, because the last step, being a leader, you really don't control. That is what other people will feel about you. They can't even control it completely. So start working on yourself. Try to become a good manager. Make sure that you provide clarity, clarity, and clarity. One of those what, when, and how is also the how part. The how part can relate to values. So you must be able to have difficult discussions. If people do things in the wrong way, unethical in your company's, then you should have difficult discussions. So it doesn't mean that being a manager is easy. But it does make sense to start there. See, we're all born bloody selfish. We're just born and we soiled ourselves, and we cry, and we expect somebody else to solve the problem. We're hungry, we cry, and we expect somebody else to solve the problem. And then we have to go to the playground and to share a toy. When we continue to focus on ourselves as long as we study, then you have to be part of a team. And then you meet somebody that you love, and you realize that you can care for somebody else. And then from that love comes a third person, and then that first person, the little one, of course, well, suddenly you love that third person too. And then comes grandparenting, where you're able to have true love for children that you did yourself. And so you see there is kind of natural change of focus from being totally focused on yourself when you're just born to being actually totally focused on other people when you get older. And probably part of the game is that when you are at peace with what inevitably will come, is that when you are so much focused on other people that it all comes and you will feel okay and at peace with it. We're not there, of course. So being a manager is probably the place to start. And then try to be a trustworthy person and make sure that other people trust each other. Make sure that you call out behavior that is not trustworthy and so on. And then you can have a higher performance team, because here you have a bunch of individuals working, doing the right thing. But here you have a bunch of individuals working together, way more powerful. And then the last step is, of course, being a leader. But that you don't control anymore. That is the moment when you genuinely care about other people. That is the moment when you take more pleasure in the success of somebody else than you would for your own success. And that again is actually very, very powerful, because then you have the safe environment in which other people will start taking initiatives. And so you see that there is also a logical flow from those three models, from being very directive to allowing people to work together and actually allowing people to take initiative. So it always amuses me when I talk to big CEOs or CTOs or COOs and so on, and you ask them, what are you doing? What are your plans for next year? And they will tell you, I want to increase return on equity with 10%. I want to have 20% more customers. And I'm always thinking, yeah, you misunderstood your job. Your job is not to make those KPIs. And you can't do that because you have 1,000 people working for you. Those people will do that. Your job is to work with people, so they have the safe environment in which they can take initiative, the environment in which they feel cared for, so they can care for your customers. And when they care for your customers, then your customers will make your KPIs. You don't. So being a leader might be a little bit frightening because you don't have full control over the KPIs and everything. Yes, I apologize for the picture. It is not a very happy scene. Fukuma was a leader. And actually, our model of leadership is pretty close to the apes. Actually, apes have a very different model. You have the gorilla, who has a harem and very dominant male. And then you have the bonobos, which is peace and love. Make love, not war, that type of style. And then you have the chimpanzees. And their innate reflexes working with leadership is pretty much the same. Politics and dynamics work pretty much the same. The leader in chimpanzee world is usually a male who is of good health, not necessarily the strongest, but he is able to have a few strong males around him that will protect him and the power dynamics that are in place. Anyhow, he is the leader, so he has the first choice of mate and meat, and if something goes wrong, he takes the hit first, leaving the others safer. And also you can check through biological studies how much stress apes have. And you see that lowest ranking apes have high levels of stress. The higher they get in the hierarchy, the lower the level of stress. Until they're the leader, then the stress levels are through the roof, because that is an absolute dangerous position to be in. For example, you have to be judge in chimpanzee world. And so where males can go happily around for days without food, especially when they are pursuing a female. Females, they want regular food, and food is very important, so they might also quarrel about the food. And so it is expected that the leader breaks up those fights. But of course, the leader is related to some of the females, like mother, daughter, sister, and so on. And if the leader then systematically chooses to prefer or to the side of the apes that he knows better, well, he is not a fair leader. So every chimpanzee leader has a downfall. And when you fall from the pedestal of being a leader, you will suffer. You get beaten, nobody's grooming you anymore, and you fall to the lowest ranks of society because the whole new power dynamics start to exist. If you have been a good leader, you'll survive it. Beaten, but survive it. If you are like Fukuma, you don't. So he got beaten to death. Not only that, they started to cannibalize his corpse. They were biting parts of his throat and groin. And so leadership does come at a certain cost. Now, even when we stop using Zoom and go back to the office, we won't bite each other's throat and groin. But as a leader, you have to be willing and you have to be ready to take the hit first. If something is forced upon you that you have to do and it is unethical or it doesn't work or will just be too cumbersome for people, so people can't do their work and things will go wrong, you have to be able to say no to the hierarchy upwards and protect the people that are part of your team. You will not only be liked. I have had very dark situations in my life, and especially career-wise, and usually related to protecting customers and or employees. Not always such things will be appreciated, but at least I can talk about it maybe next time. That is not to say that there is only one type of leadership. Leadership is a very generic word that basically somehow means giving direction and helping other people or societies to move forward in a certain direction. I think there are much different classes. That is by no means a scientific classification of leadership. But I think it's important for Kraków. You see, we have come a long way. When I came to Kraków 8 years ago, we were very thin on people leadership in the service center. We started training programs. People were starting to go to an MBA program. We have now a second MBA program in AGH University in Kraków. And so those things are growing. We're more aware that people leadership is important and we are more delivering there. And when I look around the room, I know plenty of people here and I see many people that I do know that are great leaders. What we do not really have yet is transformational leaders, thought leaders, people that are really the center of change. And probably that is something that comes naturally when you have those people leaders. Because those people leaders, they will invest in other people, help you to get your PhD, support you when you want to do a research project, and maybe it is useful for the company. And you see the dynamic starting of more and more depth into what we are doing. And that probably fits well with the model that we have in Kraków, where we are expensive for simple jobs, competitive for more complex jobs, and probably that is a place where we should focus. So, to summarize, I believe that, I hope that I was able to convince you that leadership is actually a very normal thing, a very dynamic thing too. You might see that in some situations, like you are the leader because you choose to be, and then somebody else stands up and suddenly everybody just focuses on that other person and follows the other person. And that happens. And it might be, for example, on the situation of a ship, like when something dramatically goes wrong, that the captain just blocks and can't help. And somebody else randomly will stand up, and that person will lead everybody out, and hopefully everybody survives. And that is all okay, it's natural. Leadership is as natural as parenting. We're all designed to be parents. That doesn't mean that we all should be parents. Very much the same so with leadership. The key of leadership is protecting each other, protecting other people, and probably I should add, inspiring other people. If you can explain why people are doing things, and the manager explaining what, how, and when, you have covered it all. The why will inspire people. Of course, the thing is, you have to genuinely be ready to take the hit. You have to genuinely care about other people. You can't fake, and so it might come at a certain price. It won't be that dramatic as in the chimpanzee world, though. Right, let me stop here and just present some books that might be of interest. First of all, I think it's important to understand yourself and other people better. Myers-Briggs are a good start there. They're not the best scientific method to have psychological types, but on the work floor, I think it works pretty well and it's pretty intuitive. My friend Alain Hunkins, who basically explains leadership as connecting to people, communicating to people, directing people. Pretty much that model where connecting for him is connecting on an emotional base, and so you see how close that is to what I was explaining about trust. Patrick Lencioni, as mentioned, the 5 dysfunctions of the team, the pyramid. David Marquet, turning the ship around about empowering people and giving people some freedom to execute orders and being less directive. And then, of course, start with why from Simon Sinek, the inspiring part. And by the way, Simon Sinek did a lot more, so definitely worth to look up his name, for example, on YouTube, or the books that he or Patrick has written. Right, thank you very much. You have been a fantastic audience, and I think we still have time for questions.
Okay, who's ready for a question?
First of all, thank you so much. It was really inspiring, Philippe.
Thank you.
The question is following. There are certain biases about female and male leadership style. Like, just an example, women being more empathic and gentlemen being more risk aware and risk taking. So do you believe there are two different leadership styles, male and female?
No, I don't think there are different leadership styles, male and female. There are just bad and good leadership styles, and you will find them as well in men as in women. From the moment that you have a leader who starts to be selfish, he or she is not a good leader anymore. Now, about your stereotypes, those stereotypes are largely true. If you look at the MBTI profile, the biggest differences between men and women is exactly that women are probably better in connecting on an emotional basis with other people. Now, guess what? If you look at what I was explaining, trusting, caring, connecting emotionally, that's where it all starts. So actually, females have an advantage there. And in our society, I think that we don't use that natural advantage that ladies have enough. What we do is typically promoting the lady who thinks and speaks the way that you speak. And what you then get is, in MBTI terms, extroverted people, sensing, so detail-oriented people, and thinking, so directing people, and not the people that are best in connection with their emotions, and people that need. So it's a very interesting subject. I believe on averages there will be differences between how men and women approach things, but actually, we're not chimpanzees. We don't live on the African savannah anymore, and so the danger is not a lion or the males of another tribe. Typically, males of another tribe were more dangerous than lions even. We're a little bit more civilized, and we have to navigate the complexity of a corporate environment. And there is no difference between how men and women can do that. Women do have, I think, a natural advantage on being a leader. Also think about the intimate relationship or the similarities between parenting and leadership. What is leadership? Well, that is doing something for the benefit of somebody else, promoting somebody or helping somebody to do an MBA. It will cost you, that person will have to spend time on it, but you do that because you care about the other person. And then that other person will want to leave your team because he or she has some extra diploma. And again, you have to help that person. That's not for you. Parenting is pretty much the same. And again, I think ladies might have a small advantage there. Although they're also good, isn't it? Thank you for the question, amazing question. Are there other questions?
Well, I'll jump in with a question.
Sure.
What is the most challenging thing in leadership for you? The most difficult thing about leadership?
For me, I think there are two different questions. The most difficult thing about leadership is there's nothing difficult about. It is something that comes natural from the moment that you really care about other people. It's like caring for a family member. It is that true connection. You really feel so much pleasure from seeing somebody else succeeding. So it is not difficult at all, just like parenting or grandparenting is not difficult. It all comes natural for us. So, yeah, sorry, I forgot your second question.
For you, what is the most challenging thing as a leader?
Yes. So that is probably navigating the hierarchy upwards. You will also find that, for example, if you look at introversion, extroversion, around 50% of people are introverts, 50% extrovert. But when you look at the higher ranks of companies, you will find typically 80% extroverts. And so I'm rather introvert person. And so it is not so easy for me to small talk, to connect to new people, to go for a beer and have something to chat about. And so that type of things, say navigating the hierarchy upwards, is probably the challenging thing for me. I hope I make less mistakes now, at least in HSBC nobody wants to fire me at this point, not that I'm aware of. But in previous employers I came very close to being fired at some points. For example, I was in Poland, I was CEO of a fund management company, And, you know, we had that boom in the small cap market, so small companies. And I knew it was dangerous, so I didn't want to make such a fund, but my shareholders wanted to have it because, you know, it was popular and it would sell very well. That was a moment that was almost game over for me. And similar stories in the same company happened over and over again. So yes, you have to find a balance between protecting your tribe and not being fired, because once you get fired, you can't protect them anymore. Thank you for the question. Amazing question.
Oh, I see we go on more.
Philippe, in the middle of your presentation, you mentioned how important is trust
Yes.
to build, you know, with the team for the leadership. So, what are your advices? How to build the trust? How to gain the trust with the team, especially in the changing environment where some people work only, you know, from home. Some people come to the office, so it's very, I guess, challenging right now.
Yes, well, Eva, thank you so much. So for the context, Eva works for me, and I think I kind of neglected her a little. Because what I'm going to say now is actually, trust is a very fundamental, primitive feeling that we have, and we don't fully control it. If you go back to those 10 million years that we spent on the African plains, and actually much later also, we were always living in small tribes, up to 150 people, and we knew everybody. And the person that you would see every day in your tribe, that was a person that you would protect to guard you when you could sleep. But the male from another tribe, that would end dramatically, regardless if you're a male or a female. And so you kind of have that natural reflex to trust people that you know, distrust people that you don't know. We all know the story of, let's say you need a babysit and you have a 14-year-old kid, a girl of course, living on the other side of the street. You know her 14 years since she was born, you know her parents, you know her grandparents, but she has never been babysitting before. There is also a nurse of 35 years old that moved in, that has qualifications, that has a good track record and references, but you don't know her. Who are you going to give the child to? The kid across the street, of course, because you know her. And so the easy answer is go to the office, spend time with people. Now, we're not primitive creatures anymore, and just spending a few days together per year is actually enough to recharge the batteries and to create that feeling of trust. Second thing that I would say is listen. Simply listen. Being a good listener is so valuable. When you talk to somebody, focus on that person, make eye contact, don't do the emails in the meanwhile. Really listen, ask questions, make sure you understand what the person says, ask follow-up questions. How do you feel about that? Why did it happen, do you think? What will you do next? And all these kind of things. It seems so elementary. But asking questions, listening, is probably the next thing. And then the third level is, of course, you lose the freedom of being selfish and making such kind of mistakes as a leader, because once you do, you're not a leader anymore. You see, trust is something which is really very, very hard to build. Trust is being built by creating a pattern of always doing the right thing. And if you break it once, trust is gone. And that will take years to build back. Maybe never comes fully back. So that were the three things that I would answer to that question. Thank you, Eva. Great question.
Thank you very much, Philippe.
Thank you.